tucked in the pillow.
Okay. Mine's still full. So.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm just going to.
There we go. Whoa.
Wow, I don't even have to quiet anyone. I was going to go, but by the time I get back up, they said to put the chairs really high so that everyone can see us. Okay. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to episode 1 of Equity in Motion. Today is WAVE Presents Equity in Motion, episode 1, panel discussion on governance. So today we will dive in on conversations about governance in the political sphere, the community sphere, and just in our everyday life. So first, I will pass it off to Maria George, who is the co-chair of the project subcommittee of WAVE, to do a land acknowledgement.
Good evening, everyone. The Women's Advocacy Voice of Edmonton, WAVE, acknowledges the traditional land on which we reside is in Treaty 6 territory. WAVE would like to thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory for centuries, such as the Nehiyaw, Cree, Dene, Anishinaabe, Saulteaux, Nakota Iska, Nakota Sioux, and Niitsitapi Blackfoot peoples. WAVE also acknowledges this as the Métis homeland and the home of one of the largest communities of Inuit south of the 60th parallel. It is a welcoming place for all peoples who come from around the world to share Edmonton as a home. Together we call upon all of our collective, honored traditions and spirits to work in building a great city for today and future generations.
Thank you, Maria. All right, so I'm just going to do a little bit of an introduction for what WAVE is. WAVE is the Women's Advocacy Voice of Edmonton, and it was created by Edmonton City Council in 2014. WAVE fosters and promotes equity, opportunity, access to services, and inclusion for women and gender diverse individuals in our city. It is among the first of its kind in Canada, and we are proud to be ensuring that the unique perspectives of women and gender diverse folk are included in conversations that shape our city. WAVE's mission is WAVE will draw on the power of women and gender diverse folks in our community, and through the voices, we will bravely advocate to create the city we all deserve. So, as I was preparing for today's event, the internet suggested that I share a story about myself or I say something relatable to the audience. So the internet said, say something about a sports team. So I thought I would share something about my favorite football team, Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift is all over the news right now in sports headlines, so I thought it was fitting. So I thought I'd open with a little joke about football. So all the Swifties who are learning football recently, now's your time. What do football players do when they overheat? They get closer to their fans. All right, I do promise that is my first and only joke for today. I want to take this time to do a little introduction. My name is Ariza Jiwa. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the co-chair of the project subcommittee on WAVE. WAVE believes that in order to advocate for women and gender diverse people, we need to engage deeply with a broad spectrum of communities to accurately reflect the perspectives of lived experiences to decision makers. And that is what Equity in Motion is all about. So to do a little bit of a plug for our upcoming event, Equity in Motion episode 2 is on November 29th, and it is all about women succeeding in STEM and academia. But back to today. Today, I have the pleasure of moderating our event, and I'm so excited to share the stories of these fascinating guests I have here today. I have been eagerly waiting, I'm not gonna lie, I bought a new outfit for today, so without further ado, let's get started. Our next guest is new to the WAVE family, but not new to the Edmonton community. Councillor Rutherford is part of a team of 12 councillors, 8 being women, and she has paved the way for a more equitable city of Edmonton. Councillor Rutherford is passionate about addressing gender-based issues and strives to strengthen the city of Edmonton for all through creating equitable conditions with innovation, collaboration, and compassion. Let's give it up for Councillor Erin Rutherford.
I think I don't need it. I think I don't need it. Correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me this evening. It's quite an honor to be sharing some of the experiences that I have as a woman on City Council, and I'm humbled to be amongst so many amazing women who I truly admire and inspire me every day in my job. I proudly represent the constituents that live here on Treaty 6 territory in Ward Anirniq, which is the northwest part of the city. And I'm proud to be elected in a monumental election, as was mentioned, where we didn't just achieve parity, we smashed it. Yeah. Eight of 13 members of council are women. We elected our first racialized mayor and had the most diverse council to date. To date is the key word. I believe it's important to recognize this change in representation is a step in the right direction, and it's important that we also acknowledge that there's still so much more to achieve with regards to representation. Women are still underrepresented in local governments across Canada. In Canada, women hold approximately 18% of mayoral positions and 28% of councillor seats. There is often a shared experience of women in diverse leadership roles. The road to get there is long, windy, and often marked by some pretty significant hurdles. And when we do make it, we are still faced with additional and unique challenges. Research again has highlighted that Canada has a long way to go in terms of Indigenous, Black, and people of color representation. For example, a report from 2018 shed a huge gap that most major Canadian cities in Canada had council representatives that were racialized that were significantly smaller than the proportion of racialized members in the community. Almost 40% so. Politics is also innately ableist and poses significant structural barriers for people with diverse disabilities and accessibility concerns. We need to look no further than the expectations of traditional campaigning with hours and hours of door knocking as a main key driver to achieving success in a campaign to see that. There are also ongoing inequities related to socioeconomic status, and we see the same trend with racialized communities that we see with people that are lower income, lower education, and have less social networks at their disposal. Yet what we know is that diversity and representation truly do matter, not just in our roles as the one I'm privileged to hold, but across community, organizations, and government. When women and other equity-seeking groups are given the opportunity to lead in diverse roles, research shows they are community builders, collaborators, and lead with compassion. I have witnessed with my own eyes both the barriers and the negative perceptions, as well as the possibilities when women are given a seat at the table, especially with this current council. So for example, there's right now a narrative that I pervasively hear about how inefficient this council can be at times. But efficiency doesn't equal effectiveness. Items are often pulled and debated to make sure they are achieving the best outcome for Edmontonians. And if that means we're inefficient, I'm unapologetic in that process. I see my female colleagues driven by community, by wanting the best for Edmonton, and to find a path forward that minimizes harm to marginalized and unique communities. This, in my opinion, is governance in action. So we know there's a gap, and we know that we can do great things when we're given the opportunity. So what's holding us back? Everyone's story is unique, but I wanted to share tonight some personal stories that I believe have common threads to the experiences and lessons that can be applied to many. I remember when I was young, my grandpa would consistently say to me, "You can be anything you want to be, even Prime Minister." And I remember being skeptical at the time. Even with my many layers of privilege that I innately had, white, English-speaking, Canadian-born, just to name a few. Of course, I didn't have the language at the time, but I intuitively knew that it wasn't just about pulling up my bootstraps to be whatever I want, but there was going to be a harder journey for me than the men I saw predominantly in these roles. To be clear, I do not want to be Prime Minister, but it's symbolic that this is an example that my grandfather used as one of the most unattainable roles for me when I was young. The feeling never left as I grew older. Women, including myself, often feel imposter syndrome a real force of internalized oppression. I knew early on in my adult life that I wanted to run for municipal government, but often had the feeling that I wasn't good enough or ready. I needed to be older to be taken seriously, needed more work experience to be validated, more education, more community involvement. And even when I achieved all of these milestones, I still didn't feel ready or valid as a candidate. I hope that the message you hear from this is to not limit yourself or let yourself get in the way. You are enough, right now, right here, to offer your gifts, your talents, and insights to any leadership role you embark on. So what pushed me to take the leap and run for Edmonton City Council? Simple. I saw what was at stake and felt compelled to at least try. I always intended to run a winning campaign, but I was also clear to myself that the journey was just as important as the outcome, meaning no matter what happened on election night, I would run a campaign I was proud of and that was future-focused and positive. I also knew early on that while campaigning, I would not have the money that many big city campaigns have, but I am, by nature, a community builder. I chose to focus on leveraging my strengths, partially to show that a strong campaign can be run on a shoestring budget, role modeling for future city leaders. The conversations initiated, the experiences gained, the people that showed up for me in big ways and small made a difference and both changed me personally and many involved. So no matter your dreams, I encourage you to take the leap of faith and enjoy and appreciate the journey just as much as the outcome. It does make a difference. I was fortunate that my campaign resonated with many. The residents of the ward I represented voted for me to have a seat at the table. This seat, for me, comes with a very heavy obligation of uplifting marginalized and community voices and removing barriers for the next generation. Many ask if this role was what I expected, and in many ways it was. But personally, my life was turned upside down very shortly after the election. I haven't spoken much about this. My husband and I ended up separating in early 2022, and I was faced with the reality of becoming a single mom of 2 young children, 8 and 10 at the time, with a very demanding role, something I had not contemplated. In fact, in a scan of publicly available information, I cannot find any other elected officials within major Canadian cities that have this experience. And I can understand why. Going back to the first lesson, I truly believe that I would have opted out of the campaign had that separation happened prior to or during it. I accidentally ended up in this very unique experience. And what have I learned? First, women rise up when they're faced with challenges. I continue to do this job in a way that I am proud of day in and day out. Second, it's not easy. I have unique experiences that I have to navigate with this new reality. But even with that being said, most people see me and recognize the great work that I am doing. Third, it is clear that it clears the path for others. The more I model navigating these challenges, the more I speak about them, and the more I remove the barriers and challenges I face, the clearer the path for other women and diverse communities are coming forward. As I conclude, I hope you see yourself as a community leader in whatever shape and form that takes. You can and are changing our city for the better. I urge each of you to take a leadership role when you can, and don't let yourself get in the way. Remember, it's a journey worth taking because the status quo does not serve any of us, not men, not women, and not our society as a whole. And in any role, you can help clear the path for others. Women make incredible leaders. Let's create more equitable and thriving environments for women as fearless, compassionate leaders. I commend WAVE for bringing us together for this opportunity to join with open hearts and open minds, acknowledging the difficulties, but unwavering in our determination. Thank you. Now I have to try to get back in the seat gracefully.
Everybody don't look. All right, thank you, Councillor Rutherford. So we will begin our panel, but unfortunately, Audrey Poitras, the past president of the Métis Nation of Alberta, sends her regrets as she was unable to join us last minute today. However, we are grateful that Councillor Rutherford has taken the step to be both our keynote as well as part of the panel. So without further ado, let's get started. We have an all-star panel lined up for today. First, we have Funke Olokude. Her pronouns are she, her. Funke is the Executive Director of the Rouge Foundation and the President of the Nigerian Canadian Association for Edmonton. Funke works towards continuously delivering cutting-edge, collaborative practices to promote a holistic approach to issues impacting individuals, systems, and policies to bring about transformative and equitable change. She is a seasoned C-suite executive, intercultural relationship facilitator, and educator working to highlight the complex intersecting realities of vulnerable and marginalized populations. Funke has over 15 years of extensive experience in social services, in the social service industry, working with diverse populations in sectors of Alberta, Quebec, and Ontario, where she continuously promoted equity in policy and practice that has led to transformational relationships between individuals and systems. I don't know how she has any spare time, but in her spare time, she also serves on the boards of the Brendan Center for Career Advancement, Black Business Ventures Association, and is the convener of the Ethno-Cultural Community Leadership Circle. That is Funke. Next, we have MLA Janis Irwin. Her pronouns are she, her. MLA Irwin was first elected to the Legislative Assembly of Alberta as a representative for Edmonton-Highlands-Norwood in 2019, and she was re-elected in 2023. Janis serves as the official opposition critic for housing. Prior to being elected, Janis was a high school teacher and a vice principal in rural Alberta. Edmonton soon became home when she began working for Alberta Education as a senior manager, social studies, and then executive director for high school curriculum. Janis holds a bachelor's degree in education from the University of Alberta and a master's degree of education from the University of Calgary. She has served as a board member and volunteer with many community organizations. Janis loves getting outside, biking, running, and exploring Edmonton's beautiful river valley. That is MLA Janis Irwin. All right, and our third panelist, Councillor Rutherford spoke, but I want to briefly provide some additional information. Erin Rutherford, she, her, was elected to Edmonton City Council representing Ward Anirniq in 2021, October, and was appointed to WAVE as a councillor advisor in April 2023. She has many years of public service experience, including social planning and public engagement, and she holds 2 degrees, an undergraduate degree in anthropology and human geography, and a master's of arts in community development. Erin has lived in Edmonton for over 20 years and resides in Ward Anirniq with her 2 children and their cat named Olive. All right, so let's get started on our panel. I wanted to start on a more positive note because women tend to not highlight their accomplishments. So looking back at your career, what are you most proud of? And I'll pass it over to you, Emily, or when to start.
Why do I have to start? Seems unfair. No, thank you for having me, and it is an honor to join all of you on Treaty 6 territory. Accomplishments, I have to just give a little bit of context for my work. I get asked, I visit a lot of schools, and they often say, like, what do you well, they actually often ask questions about my cat, but sometimes they ask more in-depth questions, like, what are you most proud of, or what's your biggest accomplishment? And I always struggle with that question, admittedly, because, I've served only ever in opposition, right? So since first being elected in 2019, and so it's hard to say, well, I helped pass this bill, because we don't, we haven't had we've had a lot of success, but not in the sense of, like these tangible things, because, I would say, I am getting to an answer to your question, I swear, because right away you're like, there, it's so negative, and I'm being negative. Hang on, I've accomplished nothing. But no, here's where I'm getting to the positive. I think the positive is where, even though, like I can't say, well, there was this piece of legislation, but there have been so many times where we've spoken out and where we've stood up for things that we believe in. And, it all makes it worthwhile when you have a constituent that comes up and says, like, thanks for fighting on this issue, or an example being when we stood up for 2S LGBTQ plus students, and I literally had kids saying like, you know, thanks for being who you are and being unapologetic. Well, they probably didn't say unapologetic, but you know, being who you are and using your voice as best you can. So I think that's maybe what I can point to, is just doing all I can as an opposition MLA, and hopefully one day a government MLA.
Thank you. That sounds good. How about you, Funke? What are you most proud of in your career?
It doesn't get easier. It's still difficult for me to answer. But, you know, as Erin was speaking, and thank you so much for sharing bravely, I started to think about my own journey. I struggle to always answer this question. And even when you were reading my biography, I'm like, is that me? Like, she's talking about someone else. We all struggle with it. And I think we need to begin to ask ourselves why. Why do we always struggle as women to own it, even though we've walked that path, you know? So I'm grateful for the journey that I've had, but also I'm grateful. I remember when I first became the executive director of the Rouge Foundation, I was just coming off 6 months of a separation. I've never spoken about this too, but Erin has given me the bravery to speak about this. I was 6 months out of my separation, and it was like, boom, you're the new executive director. I was trying to figure out my life, and then I became an ED of a grassroots nonprofit organization. And now I was speaking for a community, you know, and I was like, wow. But also, 2 years after my separation, I became the president of the Nigerian Canadian Association of Edmonton, a community that is very, very traditional when you think about the views about women. So for me, it was like, I literally went home that day, I sat on my floor, I was home alone, and I cried. Because I realized, I never saw myself as a leader, but my community did not reject me. They saw me for who I am. They saw me for the things that I could do, but not because I was a woman. And oftentimes in my community, after you've gone through a separation, a divorce, you know, our community is quite traditional. So I'm grateful for the journey. I'm grateful that the journey I've learned, and I've allowed the journey to make me become the human I am today. But being the president of the largest African Caribbean Black community in Edmonton and in Alberta, I think it's a great accomplishment. I should be proud of it.
How about you, Councillor Rutherford?
Yeah, it's the same thing. I talked a little bit about imposter syndrome in my keynote, but also my background in community development. The whole concept of community development is to help other people to shine, to bring their community aspirations to light, and you know, kind of create the conditions, but take no credit. And so my team always bugs me because I always use we, like, we on council, and they're like, but you moved that motion, you did this. So I'm really bad at that too. But I actually want to go back a little bit further. So I was a primary researcher. I worked for a stint at the Office of the Child and Youth Advocate, which is an amazing organization that does advocacy for some of our most vulnerable children that are either in the justice system or the child welfare system. And I was the primary writer on the Speaking Out report, which was around sexual and gender diverse youth's experience in youth justice and the child welfare system. And I bring that one up because, again, you'll never see my name on that document, and that's okay. But I got to go into, you know, see what, like the young offender centers in Calgary and Edmonton. I got to interview youth that were sexual and gender diverse and hear their experience. I got to go to group homes and meet with youth, and I got to bring their voices forward. And I think that those recommendations were really paramount and based in children's rights and based in their voices. And so again, that to me is like one of my proudest accomplishments. It was a lot of work, a lot of research, and it wasn't really about me in the end. And that's something that I, again, haven't really, shared before, so.
Well,
we're just sharing
you.
all kinds of things.
Yeah, thank you for the vulnerability on all three fronts. That's very valuable that the safe space is created to inspire each other to share your own unique experiences. So what are some takeaways from any obstacles or mistakes you may have faced throughout your leadership journey? And I'll pass it to you, Funke.
I think for me, often face a lot of obstacles in the work I do. I'm oftentimes the only Black female or the only Black person in some of those spaces. And it's challenging when you're trying to get your perspective across, and it seems like people are not hearing you or they're not getting you. But rather than shut down or feel isolated, I have learned to start to be an educator and teach people. I am a first generation immigrant. I'm originally from Nigeria, West Africa, but I came here about 20 years ago. So I've decided in those spaces to teach people and to educate people about who I am and my population and what that's why I never say Black most times. I say African Caribbean Black, right? There's diversity within the Black population. You need to know that, right? Right now, 58.8% of the ACB folks in Alberta are first generation immigrants. What does that mean? So when we're in spaces, we have to have some of those conversations. So rather than shut down and say, oh, you're not getting it, I try to educate and empower people to be allies or to be able to understand the issues on a deeper level that we're trying to tackle as well. So I face obstacles, but I try to get around them, right? Because oftentimes, let's face it, for most of us, we may find ourselves in spaces. It might be a round peg trying to put in this square hole, right? So how do we figure it out? So I don't see it as obstacles per se. It's just another day doing our jobs, right?
All right. How about Councillor Rutherford? What are some takeaways from any obstacles you may have faced?
Yeah, well, I think for me, again, going back to my childhood, I grew up in Morinville, rural Alberta, and we didn't have a lot of diversity in our town. This is, in the 80s and 90s in Morinville, and I was quite ignorant into my 20s. Like, I don't think I'd even tried, Indian food until I was in my mid-20s, right? This is the reality. So for me, I would say the journey started early 20s and is continuing now for self-reflection and continual unlearning of the things that I've learned as a child related to, truth and reconciliation, related to racism. And I have had some great folks in my life that felt that I was at least safe enough to call me on my stuff and call me on it. And those were really hard moments in the moment to hear that from people that you care about and admire. But it's always about how you show up and how you improve after that. And so I would say for me that one of the things that I really focus on is constantly being open to feedback, to imperfection and continual learning and improvement. But it's been a long journey to get there and some pretty hard lessons along the way.
Yeah, well, she mostly stole my answer, but but I think looking at obstacles, I kind of think about mistakes that I've made and how I overcome that. My takeaways are that it's okay. Like you will make mistakes, and as Erin said, it's about owning it and it's about accepting that. And for me as a politician, I've never loved when I've seen other elected officials who are not willing to own their mistakes and to admit them publicly and to be willing to like you said, step up and do better and improve. And so I think that's sort of one of the key ones for me, is just knowing, like, it's hard in the moment. You think you're never gonna be able to fix it, or you're never going to be able to move on. But it will pass, and it's that reminder that we're humans, and it can be challenging when you are under a spotlight or multiple spotlights, and feel like everybody's on you and everyone's judging you. But again, reminding yourself that you're human and grounding yourself in the fact that you can always wake up the next day and do a lot better.
Thank you. It does seem like there's a lot of parallels and experiences that you all have, and thankfully you are all admitting that mistakes happen very frequently because it's just part of our everyday life. So speaking on those parallels, I think this question will touch on the differences in all three of your experiences. How do intersectional identities and equity issues impact one's leadership journey in governance? And Councillor Rutherford, I'll pass it over to you.
Easy one.
Well, and I think that this is where it's really important to recognize that each person is so dynamic and unique, and we have so many intersections of identity, both that are sources of privilege, and sometimes are not. Some more than others, obviously, but I think for me, again, one of the things that I haven't really shared too much is that I do deal with also mental health, right, on the regular. And that's, again, something that I think is important in these kind of spaces to share, because I think women often see women in leadership roles like the ones that we have, and that we've got all our stuff all together and in a nice package. And we don't. And also we only see there's often identity factors that we can easily see and identify, right? You can tell that I'm white. You can tell as soon as I speak that I'm probably born somewhere in North America, right? There are these things, but there's other things that there's so many more layers to people that you often don't know, and we make a lot of assumptions about. And so for me, it's always making sure, I think what shaped me in knowing that I have a lot of dynamic layers is not making any assumptions about anybody else that I'm interacting with in any way, shape, or form, and letting them indicate to me what their identities are, what shapes them, what that has meant for them. Because again, as you mentioned, Black identity isn't, all the same, and it's different experiences across that. So I think that for me, as I've done, and I'd say more so my education than actually my identity has really taught me to be open to not making assumptions of others.
All right. MLA Irwin, what are some identity and equity issues that impacted your leadership journey?
Oh my goodness. I think I'll talk about, I was going to say the obvious one, but again, there's never necessarily anything obvious. But I am a queer member of the legislature. And when I was first elected in 2019, I learned fairly quickly that I was the only one who identified as a member of the 2S LGBTQ+ community. And right away, I was a little worried because people kept asking me like, oh wow, what is it like to be the only one in that, or I always like to say the only openly one, because you never know, out of 87 MLAs across the province. And kind of sort of what Erin was alluding to, and you as well, Funke, is just this idea that like, but I can't actually, I can't, and nor should I represent the queer and trans community, because the queer and trans community is very diverse itself. And I'm a white cisgender woman with a whole heck of a lot of privilege, right? I can move pretty freely throughout this world, and I can't possibly know what it's like to be a racialized trans person who we know on average experiences far higher levels of violence and discrimination, right? So never thinking that I had to be the voice or should be the voice for a very diverse community, and always knowing too that, and I obviously I'm an opposition MLA with the NDP, even though I was the only one, I was surrounded by a whole bunch of allies who would talk about these issues. I didn't have to be the sole voice, right? And that kept me going. And then fast forward to 2023, and now we have multiple members who identify as part of the 2S LGBTQ+ community. So it's a great indicator of some progress that's being made, because one of the things that I talk a lot about women in politics and gender diverse folks and racialized folks in politics, and we've made some progress. Like on city council, we've made some progress. In the legislature, we've made some progress, but there's still a lot of work to do, because I want our elected officials to represent Alberta. And, it was only in 2023 that we elected the first Black woman ever in Alberta's history. In 2023, and that's my colleague Rhiannon Hoyle in Edmonton South. And we didn't have Indigenous MLAs in the last legislature. And now we have 2 in the NDP, and the UCP has one as well. And so, progress is being made. And I'm always somebody who will say that representation matters. And it does. And so that's there's a lot of intersections there, but I think they all relate.
Okay, thank you.
Funke?
I look forward to the day we'll have a Black city council.
I do too.
Yeah.
That's what I was talking about. The progress still needs to be made,
Are you
right?
interested? Should we maybe talk to
Oh, yeah.
I have your resume.
Yes.
Okay, back to your question.
So what equity issues have impacted your leadership journey?
Well, I think Janis and Erin have spoken quite well, but I would just add a plug from work. I think intersecting identities give us a vantage point when it comes to equity. I really like standpoint theory because it always tells us to design from the margins. And how do we know where those margins are? Is by looking at the intersecting identities of the folks we're trying to deal with. So when we're looking at an issue, we start to design from the margins. Who's most marginalized within those intersecting identities? Then we can plan, because as soon as you start planning from the margins, chances are you'll get to the people in the middle who have more privilege. So I think for me, that's how I look at it. So it's an advantage for us to use that always when we're trying to seek equity for any kind of issue that we're dealing with in society.
That's great. It's great to hear that all three of you are trying to use your unique perspectives to encourage others. Had you not said certain things today, others wouldn't have shared in the same way. So that alone is an example of how we're all empowering each other and how the uniqueness of our differences can bring us together to make a city that's just more inclusive. All right, so do you believe the path is getting easier for subsequent generations, or and what should subsequent generations aim for, subsequent leaders? And I'll start with you.
That's a tricky one because, again, you know, I think the easy answer is that yes, things are getting better. Like I said, I talked a little bit about representation in politics and how we've seen some what I would call positive shifts. But then I guess the realist in me also has to acknowledge that in some ways things aren't getting better, and not directly related to governance or leadership, but just in the human rights realm, and seeing the rise of the far right and of attacks on communities that have fought so hard for their rights, only to see them threatened again. Particularly, we can talk about the queer and trans communities, even here in our own backyard. It's actually very close to here recently, in Edmonton. And so I think, yes, like we can say that there have been some advances, but I think there's been recent events that really should compel us all to acknowledge that there's a whole heck of a lot of work to be done, and that is also mirrored in governance and in leadership capacities as well.
The easy answer is yes, but the obvious answer is usually not the right answer.
Yeah.
Yes. But I think from doing work for a long time in this space, I would use housing, for example. When we think about housing is just getting a little bit more complex. I think society, globalization, technology, lay all of that together just makes issues that have been with us for a long time, just making it a little bit more complex. So I believe, yes, things may be getting easier, but they're also getting a little bit more complicated and a little bit more convoluted with each other. So how do we untangle some of these very simple issues that we've had before that were very localized? Now they're getting globalized, and the issues happening in Toronto, 24 hours later, they're coming to Alberta, right? So that never used to happen before. So it's just, I think for future generations, they just have to think a little bit more outside the box than we did, because these are getting more complex.
All right, and Councillor Rutherford, do you think it's getting easier for subsequent generations, and what can our future leaders aim for?
Yeah, I'm going to be a little bit less optimistic, especially at the municipal level, because I think from a social policy perspective, there's been some changes with the Elections Act that have actually made it quite hard to break that barrier. So I think about the fact that sitting councillors can fundraise every year. They can start a campaign essentially with $2,000 in their pocket or $20,000 in their pocket, and they've raised $5,000 each year that they were sitting as an elected official. That to me makes it really hard. There's talk right now, this provincial government, I'm not pointing at Janis because she's not the one, she's not governing, but like they're talking about potential slates and having parties at municipal. So when I talked about in my keynote speech about the need for a social network. Well, as soon as we add slates to the mix, then if you are not somebody that knows somebody, you're not going to get on a slate and you're not going to get elected. So I'm really worried about the same backslide, especially in municipal politics. To be fair, I have not fundraised any money. I refuse ethically to do that, just on my own personal morals. So I will start at the same slate as everybody else. but that's a choice I'm personally making, not one that all elected officials are making.
Yeah, it's good to recognize there's progress being made, but still progress to go.
Well, and social policy that really, you know, in whatever level of government you're at, policy is often not sexy, but it's often really what is changing those systems long term and over time. And I don't see that right now provincially.
I think that brings us to what an audience member may be able to do to get started in their leadership journey in the governance sphere. Funke, any ideas?
Okay, I'll just share my own journey. So I think mine was born out of frustration. I remember working frontline. I did frontline for a long time as a social worker as well here in Alberta. But many years ago, I think working frontline 2 years, and I kept seeing these memos and these policies that come down and nobody knew where they came from. You just saw a memo or just saw a policy, you come to work. And I'm like, this doesn't fit. Like, who's making this? Like, this doesn't feel right for our clients. There was a time I was working at the biggest homeless shelter in Ontario, and I'm like, but we can do this, right? So policies and memos were bumping against service provision, and it wasn't favoring the front line or the families that we're seeing. So I'm like, you know what? I want to go to that room or space where these policies are being made. I want to see what it is like over there. And I decided to volunteer on the board, and that's how I started, and I couldn't stop, because what I quickly realized, I was still in my third year of university then at York University, but I quickly realized the people who were making these memos and policies were amazing people. They just had not the right perspective. And that's why the policies and memos that were coming down were bumping for us and was in the way for us to do our job. So that's how I started. Mine was born out of frustration. And since then, I couldn't stop, because I knew my voice, or the voice of people who couldn't be in those spaces, needed to be heard. And that's what I've been done since then. Just be in spaces and share people's stories as they share them with me. And that's why I love being in community as well, because that's where you get the most authentic stories. So I think volunteering is what has helped me, and also mentoring. I'm big on mentorship. Even at my level right now, I always have serial mentors, 3, 4 at a time, but I'm also always open to mentor new people, because that's how we get change done. It's getting in the spaces where those decisions are being made and making sure that those people who are not represented, you're bringing in a different perspective to that room. Yeah.
That sounds good to everybody. She's open to being a mentor.
So your spare time.
So Janis, what do you think a member in our audience should take steps to go forward in their leadership and governance journey?
Yeah, honestly, like, I don't know if I have any specific, helpful, tangible advice other than to just do it. Like, I do get asked a lot about running, you know, as women and gender diverse folks, like, you know, people who are interested in running, but they're not sure, kind of like what Erin talked about in her keynote, just feeling like, well, you know, I'm not old enough, or I don't have enough experience, and I just don't feel well equipped, or I've got my family, I've got this, right? Women make those excuses all the time. Mm-hmm. It's very rare for a man to say, well, I don't think I'm old enough, and I just probably am not experienced, and, you know, I got the family. And it's true, and there's research to support this, right? And I've told this story before. It might have even been at a YWC event. It's one of the events here at one point, but there was a woman who she was involved with the federal NDP, and she would do candidate recruitment. And she said, yeah, she would get woman after woman who was just like, their resumes were incredible, right? These were women who were, and even if they weren't, they were women that brought really important perspectives to the table. And, you know, they'd all say that they just weren't ready, or they'd have all these questions. And then she literally would talk about how there would be like a 19-year-old guy who would walk in and be like, okay, I'm ready. Where can I run? Right? And again, not to begrudge, sorry if there's any 19-year-old men in this room, not to begrudge them, but I mean, these are the types of things that often as women we do, right? And we question our capabilities, and we question our qualifications. And I want young people, right? I want young people to run for office. I want people who don't have, you know, extensive education. I think our politics is richer when we have people with varying backgrounds. And so just the point of that long rambling story is, if you're thinking about running, to do it, right? And to ask those questions, and to realize that you have just as much right to run as anybody else. And again, that's not just for politics, that's for governance and leadership positions as well. Like, if you're thinking about that board position, you're thinking about that chair position, go for it. You're as qualified as anyone else.
So Funke mentions mentoring and volunteering. You're mentioning just doing it.
Do it.
Councillor Rutherford, what do you think our audience members could do to expand on their leadership journey?
Yeah, well, I think leadership is such an interesting word in of itself, because there's so many mental paradigms and cultural paradigms that go along with that term. So I think it's really important to recognize that leadership isn't just always at the front. It's not always the people that are just sitting here. There are many leaders in this room, and there's many people that lead from behind as well. But what I would say is that, and it's never served me wrong in my career and where I am today, is if you can be grounded in what drives you, what gives you passion, what gives you energy, and you do anything that you can within that field, whether it's you care about children, or you care about social justice, or you care about baking, it doesn't matter. If there's something you're passionate about and you really love, lean into that, because I guarantee you others will see that passion, you'll be happier, and you will achieve great things that way. Love that.
These are all great. These are tangible. You mentioned not having tangible, but these are great steps that we can take. We do have time for audience questions, but we do also have more. But I want the audience to think of some questions, and after the next question, I'll pop it over to the audience should you have any. Regarding gender equity issues that you have addressed through your career, what kind of efforts from organizations and individuals has worked really well? And Councillor Rutherford, I'll start with you.
Oh, gee. So in my community development career, I think one of the best practices that I ever sort of was a game changer for me, I guess, in the community development sphere, was starting to acknowledge that no space, no interaction was neutral. And what I mean by that is there's always power dynamics at play. And so often we try to brush those power dynamics under the rug and pretend that they don't exist. But actually, when we start to like put them on the table and grapple with them, we actually can create the space where everybody can feel a part of that table fully, because we've acknowledged, we've removed, and we've addressed the power structures. So for me, that is huge, right? Like, always, neutrality is a fallacy, and anybody that's like, oh, this is neutral, it's no, nothing is neutral in our world. Nothing is at all. And the more we can acknowledge what power structures are at play, whether it be, the march that happened recently, whether it be a social policy that's being changed, whether it be women sitting around a table and having a conversation, there's always power structures at play. And the more that we can break those down and acknowledge them, the more everybody actually gets equal footing.
Well, I'm hopeful this is one of those events where women are together, women and gender diverse folk are together. Funke, what equity issues have, what kind of efforts from organizations and individuals have worked well in relation to equity issues?
So in my work with the Rouge Foundation, we got a grant from the federal government to look at the mental health of Black Canadians. So one of the deliverables from that project for us is to build a curriculum that looks at the experiences of towards LGBTQ plus folks who also are part of the ACB community, are part of the African, Caribbean, and Black community, and also identify as youth. So you begin to see the layers of that project. The interviews were heartbreaking. I'm not going to lie to you. Showed a lot of complex realities of that population. But also what has worked well, we're in the phase of creating a curriculum right now. What has worked well has been an intersectoral collaboration. Everyone first of all, we had to center the issue. Who's at the center of this issue? And we had to center it well. And then we started to build from there. And then we brought every single stakeholder, Pride Center, Rainbow Refuge, Edmonton Police Services, because they're going to be hopefully using this curriculum someday, right? And bring everybody together and let's have a conversation. And all the while, we're always member checking with our target population as well. So having a collaborative piece from the grassroots to the top has really been helpful in my own line of work, doing some community-based research as well. So I think that's great. And we also always have the academics as well, right? People like Karen's team is always there, have to give a shout out to her, right, from the U of A. So always have people from the U of A, because there's always that evidence-based. Is it just someone's story versus where's the evidence? Show us the evidence. And that's what the ACB community has always been challenged with. Oh, you know what, racism is just someone's story. Where's the evidence, right? So always making sure that we have that. Anyone who wants to fact check or anyone who wants to say gotcha, no, we have, it's credible information and it's credible sources as well. So bringing everybody, institutions, grassroots, who's being centered, who's going to be most impacted together, and having this conversation together over time, not just a one and done thing, but over time, right? And then when we get something, we know we've thought about it, we've made the uncomfortable comfortable, we've gone through the fire together, and then we've produced something that everyone can stand by. It doesn't matter what side of the issue you're standing on. So I think that has worked for me.
Perfect. So we've heard that getting people in spaces together is helpful, ensuring that there is proper evidence and data collection. What else can organizations do?
Well, and I mean, yeah, honestly, like conversations like this are so helpful and powerful. So thank you for all of you just for being here today. And, I just will say, especially because, again, I often come at it from the lens of politics and, I talk about things like fundraising and all these things that are often barriers, especially for women and gender diverse folks. But I always come back to the most important resource is people. And, when I started running for office, I tell this story, like I didn't grow up in Edmonton, small town as well. Shout out to Barhead, small town as well. And, I had been away from Edmonton. I was a teacher in another part of rural Alberta. And when I came back and I started volunteering and started getting involved with the NDP and started, running for office, I didn't have this giant network of people, right? Because people always think, well, you need a bunch of money and you need a giant team. And I just, always said, like, no, honestly, if you have a couple of people who believe in you and who are there to support you, that's just so important. So always keeping in mind your human resources, not to think of people as things, but it really is, because it also comes back to the point, Erin, that you made around mental health, right? Because there will be, and again, not just in politics and in life and in leadership positions, there will be so many days that are trying. Right? But if you always have those people that you can come back to for support, that's gonna get you through.
That's really helpful. Are there any questions from the audience? It's okay if there aren't. I'm prepared. But yes.
I kind of have a question. I'm going to try and process as I'm saying. All of you alluded to kind of this idea of systems change and how we change the system, and there's research and things that we know about like ripple effects causing systems change and how we choose to show up, and the stories that we tell in spaces create changes in systems. And so I'm wondering if there's things that you reflect on or think about as a rejection of the dominant system, and like ways of being or values that you think are signals or glimmers for the future that you try to embody, because so much of that is really helpful for everyone else to see where things can go or how we can show up differently, the uniqueness that we have and how we bring it forward.
So I'm just going to quickly summarize that for our live stream. I don't know that I'll do half as good of the job. So Ria in our audience was mentioning that everyone is showing up in their own unique way. What are some glimmers of hope that we can see moving forward?
Values, ways of being that you think are a rejection of traditional ways of being, and new ones that you think are seeds for how we move forward.
I can stay.
You start. Yeah.
No more.
Oh yeah. I don't need
How do I even summarize this brilliant question? Need my pen and paper.
So I would say that for me, I can really see politics is something that is such a culture in and of itself, and it can be really toxic. And one of the things that I think often happens with many people, both even intentionally or unintentionally, is we lose vulnerability, the ability to be vulnerable. And I think that's a real disservice to the public. I think it's one of the reasons that's caused that jadedness with politicians so often. So for me, I'm continually mindful to be vulnerable, not be taken advantage of or, in that way, but also to have my heart open and to not close my heart, and to be okay with whatever happens. And I know that that is very different from how many politicians operate. I always say that I'm a very bad politician in many ways, because when somebody, like, I'll just tell people I'm very authentic too. That's one of my main core values of who I am, is authenticity. So I also will be pretty candid with people about like where I stand on an issue, what I'm thinking. And I think people are responding that it's refreshing a lot of times, but I'm definitely intentionally doing it. And I do feel the pressure in this role to sometimes not do that. So I'm intentionally continuing to do that.
Your question is a tough one for me, because that is what I do every day, right? When I do work in the ACB space, is you're speaking to decolonization. Pretty much, that's what you're asking us to think about, because systems are inherently colonial. And when you're trying to advocate or speak on behalf of, most days I gather stories, so I'm just a mouthpiece, for ACB folks, it's exactly what we're doing. I'll give you an example. Sometimes I'm in rooms, depends on the day and how the sun looks. I might say harm reduction versus reduction of harm, right? So those are the kinds of things that we use to shift systems and to understand the system, because we know that the system is rigged against certain folks, right? So, and I really appreciate you asking that question, because it's one that we really need to think about in the social policy space. And if we're thinking about equitable social policy, right? So the systems have been designed in a certain way. So when we show up, how we're responding to that and not even feel burnt out. But something I really actually got tired of fighting systems every day. It's exhausting. So one of the strategies I decided to use in my work in the ACB community is to actually also educate people. I use the praxis. So while I'm challenging systems, I try to make folks understand that it is not you. You're bumping against the system that was never designed for you. So how do you live your life every day? So we're trying to empower people and say, you know what? That is not your fault, that is, you shouldn't take on that, because it is not your issue, it is not your problem, it's just a system. While we're chipping at it, we'll get there someday, maybe 3 generations from now when I'm gone and away. But that is my hope, that I will do my little bit when I'm here and someone else will take over, right? But people need to start understanding that system that you're bumping against was never designed for you, so you shouldn't take on the issues that come with it. And there's a lot of trauma that happens when people bump against systems that people do not know. And there's an economic cost. That's why I try to tell politicians. Yeah. There's an economic cost to systems bumping, to that trauma, right? An economic cost to all of us, on our taxpayers' dollars. Because when people bump against systems and they get tired, guess what? They go on a leave and we all pay for it. So we need to start thinking about how those systems are designed, and those people who they keep rejecting, that are having an effect on every one of us as well. So thank you for asking that question.
Oh my goodness, I can't follow these two. But yeah, I'll just touch on something that's really top of mind for me right now. And you mentioned that I'm the critic for housing. And so I've just been trying to talk to as many people as I can in the housing sector. But not just, people who are the heads of organizations or even frontline workers, although shout out to the frontline workers working in housing. The neighborhoods I represent, Central Edmonton, I've got Boyle Street, Macaulay. We have the bulk of visibly unhoused folks. I want to hear from them too, and I do, right? It's something that I do often when I'm biking down 96th Street or in my car, just stopping and hearing those stories, because it's a lot to what you spoke to, of people who are in the place that they are, not because of necessarily anything that they did or they didn't do, but because of systems that have worked against them, and because of trauma, often intergenerational trauma, and many other broader societal issues, right? And so trying to remind myself every day that there are just so many people who have stories and need to be heard, but often aren't, and they're not the people we go to when we need to be. And so I think it comes back to the importance of story too, and the importance of doing the best I can to try to not speak for communities that are marginalized, but at least try to amplify their voices.
That sounds like really tough work. Work that's harder and harder, but the steps are being taken, which is really important. So I think that actually gives lead to our next question, which is, was there a time in your life where you thought a step, oh no, sorry. Was there a time in your career where your leadership journey plateaued? How did you kickstart it back into a growing trajectory?
Well, I can start on that one, and it, again, just because, and I'm sorry, I have to just always talk about politics here because it's been my life for the last 10 or so years. Because yeah, about 10 years ago, I launched a campaign to run federally. So in 2013, I set aside a lot of, I was working for the government, I was doing my PhD, I was teaching at the university, I was doing way too many things. And then I was like, let's run for office too. So I decided to do that. And I put, to promise you, I'll tell the short version of the story. I put 2 years of my life into this campaign, running federally to be the member of parliament for the area that most part of which I represent now provincially. But I started to build a team, and I knocked on every door and many doors multiple times, and did all the things right, and I lost, right? I lost, and a lot of people would say, well, that was 2 years of your life wasted. Well, it wasn't. It was hard at the time, right? It was one of those things where it's like, whoa, what did I do, and what am I going to do next? And I continued, right? So I stayed involved in politics, and I didn't run again until 2019. But I knew that it was something that I was hoping to get back into, even though at the time I felt like I'd let so many people down, and I'd let myself down, that kind of thing. But it's like, there's a lot of things out of our control, right? Especially when it's politics, even in various leadership journeys, right? You might, I give a lot of, I was a high school teacher, so forgive me because I talk a lot to students, especially high school students, and I always just talk about the fact that, like, you might have this path mapped out for you when you're in high school, or even when you're in university or post-secondary, and think, okay, here's what I'm going to do when I'm older, and that path often isn't what you plan, right? Because if you had told 17-year-old Janis in Barhead, Alberta, that in 20 years she was going to be living her best life as a openly queer politician in central Edmonton, I would have said, I don't think so, right? Because an alternate journey, there were a lot of things, and I did tell you the short version of my life story. If you'd like to hear the long one, I can tell you later. But an alternate version, there were a lot of things that happened that, if they hadn't happened, I took a job in Edmonton to work on curriculum. It was supposed to be a temporary job for 3 years, and then I would go back to my rural school division, turn into a permanent job. What if that hadn't happened? I'd be probably back in rural Alberta. I may never have found politics. I could be married to the farmer I was dating and have 3 kids, some cows, a dog, and not that there'd be anything wrong with that, but like that, what a different life journey it could have been. And so the point of all that is to remind yourself that things might not make sense at the time, and that path might not be clear, but one day it will. And all those obstacles and all those what you might have thought as failures at the time, they were all part of that journey too.
Funke, how about you? Any
I don't even know if I answered the question now that
has your career plateaued in any way? And if so, how did you kickstart it back?
I don't know if it has, because the first generation immigrant, I came here not knowing anyone, and I had to rebuild my family, rebuild everyone. I have lots of family here now, but for the earlier part of my life, my career, I had no one. And I have just worked very hard. As you can see, I'm always working and always trying to, learn and be the best version of myself. I think maybe the closest time it ever came to, I'm like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? What's happening in my life was when I had my separation happen, and not having any family or anyone around. I was lost. I didn't know what I was going to do. And I never even saw myself as a leader to start with, because I was always in community. I don't know, always leading from the margins, leading at the back. I never saw myself as a leader, to be honest with you. Even when I became executive director, I was like, no, it was always we. This is what we are doing. Yeah. It's always we, and I'm very bad at that. So I think the very first time I ever saw myself as a leader was when I was elected president, and now everybody calls me Madam President. I'm like, I've lost my name, and my name has become, every single Nigerian calls me Madam President. No, not so bad, So I think that was the first time I ever saw myself as a leader. So I think that's why that question is hard for me. Even being ED, I didn't see myself as that because maybe some of it was imposter syndrome. I have many years of education, I have many years of experience, but owning that was really hard for me. And then when I lost the relationship I'd grown up in for almost 2 decades, it was like, who am I? Right? Even all these amazing things that were happening around me, I couldn't see it. And I felt I could not do anything outside of that relationship. But it's so interesting, in 2 years, I have actually done so much more, right, than I had ever done before. So I guess that's the closest I've ever come. But I don't think I have plateaued yet, if you don't mind me saying
No,
that.
that's great to hear. How about you, Councillor Rutherford?
Yeah, I like going last. It's a lot nicer to be the last one to go. For me, my career leadership probably plateaued when I had kids. And I think that's a reality that we often forget. I had pretty steady trajectory in my career, and then my daughter came along. I took a 1 year mat leave, and I ended up going back at 11 months because I was really struggling with being a stay-at-home mom. But then I basically got pregnant right away. And if you know, my kids are like 18 months apart. They're not very far in age apart. And I had my son, but we had such negative experiences with childcare with my daughter when she did go back, when I did go back to work, and we had the privilege, we actually downsized and I stayed home for a couple of years when my kids were young. And getting back into the workforce with a 2-year gap in your resume is very challenging on the best of days. So that was a real hurdle for me. And that's when I really decided to do my master's. I had to take a huge pay cut and quite a different job when I first got back into work and build myself back up. So that was a real challenging time for me in my career, and recognizing, I think we're so naive when we're young, at least I was, of like, yeah, you're gonna have kids, but like that's not gonna change anything. It changes everything. It changes as a woman, it does. It changes so much. So I mean, I'm here and grateful that I've gotten back to where I am today, which is similar to Janis, not at all where I thought I would be, but that was a hard start getting back into it. You learn a lot about how much, when people are like, what have you been doing the last 2 years? I've been staying at home with my kids. No, people do not like that answer.
I love that each of you had such different answers for that question. Are there any questions from the audience? Any others? If not, I think we have, based on what Councillor Rutherford was saying, I think this will be our last question. But you were mentioning family and your life outside of your career. How do you approach work-life balance with your currently demanding careers? Do you have tips on how to prioritize accordingly? And I'll pass it right back to you. You were last time, so you're first.
So I think work-life balance is a fallacy, similar to neutrality. I think a lot of things are a fallacy, I guess. But I think that idea that there's work-life balance, for me, it's about, am I fully present in what I'm doing? So am I fully present when I'm with my kids and when I'm on mom duty? Am I fully present when I'm at council chambers? Am I fully present when I'm out in community? And I'm fully present when I'm with my friends and my family. And so for me, it's more about practice of being in the moment, and so that I can give my full self when I have myself to give. Because I think oftentimes when you're trying to do work-life balance, you end up, you're with your kids, but you're really looking at your work emails. And so for me, like I really put my phone away, really focus on what I'm doing in that moment, and that's my sole focus. And it's served me well, but it is also, mom guilt is real, and I absolutely do have that. The kids are supposed to be with me this week, and I'm here, and tomorrow I have the Alberta municipalities thing, so I am missing time with them. But what I do then is I just make sure that when I do have time with them, that it is the most focused time that you can. We're doing something quality. We're chatting. I'm learning about them in a way that probably I wasn't as present even when I was a stay-at-home mom and with them full time, right? So it's all about how you approach it.
I agree. Work-life balance is a bag of beans that was sold. And I don't think we should still keep talking about it because I have tried it and it didn't work. It actually cost me more stress, trying to balance everything out and being told you have to balance everything, right? And sometimes you're right when I have my kids, right? And that was one of the reasons why I had to step away from being ED full-time. I'm consulting ED right now. Whatever that means, I don't know. But I'm consulting ED at the Rouge Foundation. But being executive director of a small grassroots organization, I was working 70, 80 hours a week, on top of that teaching as well. And my kids were like, Mom, you're always working. So I had to figure out what is life giving at this point. And that's a question I always ask myself now. What is life giving? I don't find work life-giving all the time, so I need to step away. And that's when I say, okay, maybe I need to take a vacation from work because it's not life-giving right now. So instead of trying to figure out what is balancing for me, I try to find out what is life-giving to me right now because that is what will build me up and fill me up as well. And I always have my kids as well. What do they need right now? What can we do together that will be life-giving to all of us, right? Because that's where we find strength most times. So yeah, that's it.
I just realized I just yawned. I'm really good at self-care. No. Read my book. No, do not. I can only make a joke of it because it's actually like, real talk. It's something I'm very, very bad at. And it's funny because I always I think about one of my colleagues who I refer to as my work wife. It's okay. Her husband's cool with it. Raki Pancholi. She, I think about at the end of the day, like how exhausted I am and I, still got things to do. And I think, oh, Raki's got, she's got kids and a husband, all these things that she has to deal with on top of that. But I also think, and she's told me this and other people too, it's like, just because I don't have kids and I don't have a partner, it almost makes it worse because I feel like, well, I can go to it. Don't worry. Like I can go, you stay home with your kids, that kind of thing. Right. So I think everybody has complexities in their lives, no matter, how their home looks. And, it is something I am very aware of because I'm not going to lie. There's been some pretty tired days lately. And part of that is I need to be able to be better at saying no. And that's a hard thing for me. Like it's a hard thing to feel like you're letting people down. Right. So it's, for me, I think it's really like an ongoing battle journey. Right. And I don't want to minimize it because I do think self-care and better phrase probably is community care is important. So to try to find those things, like for me, what brings me peace and what does help me rebalance a little bit, being outside, right, when I can, cuddling up with my very demanding son, Oregano, cat son, Oregano, and just finding those things and being with community, being with people that fill your cup.
That is awesome. What I'm hearing is that it's a journey every day. It's not the same for everybody. And what might be working for you one week might not work the following week. So it's about readjusting and realigning with your everyday life. All right. So I don't want to cut this short, but we have to. Time is up. I want to thank all three of you for your time today. We are so grateful. I see that Maria has already walked over to grab our gifts, and I want to share a little bit of what they are. So it's a small token of our appreciation, and it's a puzzle designed by Métis artist Leah Dorian. It is titled Dancing Women, and it highlights, so Dancing Women celebrates the intergenerational relationships among women and girls and how important it is to work together as a community of women. We thought it was fitting for today's event and the goal of WAVE's work. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, and as we are closing, I want to give a huge shout out to the City of Edmonton for allowing WAVE to be an advisory board and a voice for women and gender diverse folk in the city. I want to give a shout out to the YWCA, particularly Catherine, Teresa, and Christine for this wonderful space and giving us the time and space to have a community event like this. I want to thank WAVE and the project subcommittee for putting an awesome panel together. Each person was reached out to by a different by a different committee member, so it really was a team effort. I want to thank Randy and Marlis and the whole Parados team for the tech and the marketing, so thank you very much. and Fish Mediterranean for the wonderful food. And last but not least, our audience. Thank you for taking the time for making Edmonton a better place. I want to take a moment to challenge the audience so that when you get home, before you go to bed, in the shower tomorrow, take a moment. Take a moment to sit with the information you learned today. Think of one step, one challenge that you can take towards your leadership journey, one step towards a more equitable Edmonton, and one step towards empowering yourself and the people around you. If you need any help with this journey, Equity in Motion has episode 2 on November 29th. It is discussing STEM and academia. The event's agenda hopes to expose attendees to the wisdom of accomplished panelists in the STEM and academia field, while also having the chance to participate in discussions that can challenge your perspectives and equip you with the valuable tools to address equity gaps in STEM and in the STEM fields. Our Eventbrite is now live, and check out our social media for more information. The handle is EquityYeg. So please enjoy some food, stick around, network with everyone around you, and thank you very much for your time today.